The Galactic Military Academy stood on Nexus Prime like a giant metal fortress. For 300 years, it had been the most famous training school in the galaxy. Young warriors from dozens of different alien species came here to learn how to fight. Only the best of the best could get in. The academy was huge. Its towers reached high into the purple sky of Nexus Prime. Training grounds stretched for miles in every direction. Shooting ranges, combat arenas, and classroom buildings filled the massive complex. This was where the galaxy's future military leaders learned their skills. Commander Vex Thalone walked through the main hall, his heavy footsteps echoing off the metal walls. He was a Crethan, one of the warrior species that had helped build the academy. Vex stood 8 feet tall, with thick armor-like skin that looked like it was made of dark green plates. His forearms moved with practiced grace as he carried data tablets and reports. Had been teaching at the academy for 50 years. He had trained thousands of cadets from all over the galaxy. He knew which species made the best warriors and which ones would struggle. The Crethans were strong and tough. The Valdari could read minds and move things with their thoughts. The Zephyrians were so fast, they could barely be seen when they moved. The Cerebroids were smart enough to solve any problem in seconds. Today, Vex was reviewing applications for the new class. 500 of the galaxy's best young warriors would be selected from over 50,000 applications. Each one had to prove they were worthy of training at the academy. Vex stopped at his office door and pressed his palm to the scanner. The door slid open with a soft hiss. Inside, Professor Zilm was waiting for him. Zilm was a cerebroid, a species known for their huge brains and pale blue skin. His head was twice the size of a normal being's head, and his thin body looked fragile compared to Vex's massive frame. "Commander," Zilm said in his high, musical voice, "I have finished reviewing the final applications. Most are as expected. The usual mix of species, all with excellent records." Vex nodded and sat down at his desk. The chair groaned under his weight. "Any surprises this year?" Zilm's large eyes seemed to sparkle with amusement. "Actually, yes. I found something quite interesting in the application files." He held up a data tablet. "Take a look at this." Vex took the tablet and looked at the screen. His 4 eyes widened in surprise. "A human? How did a human application get into our system?" "I wondered the same thing," Zilm said. "It seems this human somehow managed to submit a proper application through normal channels. His name is Jake Morrison. He is 16 years old by their primitive counting system." Vex looked at the application more carefully. Humans were barely known in the galaxy. They lived on a small planet called Earth in an unimportant solar system. Most galactic species considered them to be primitive and peaceful. They had only recently developed faster-than-light travel, and their military technology was hundreds of years behind the rest of the galaxy. "Look at his claimed experience," Zilm pointed to a section of the application. "He says he has military training from something called Operation, Desert Storm Simulation Training, an advanced combat tactics course. He also claims to have won first place in some kind of National Military Academy preparation program." Vex started to laugh. It was a deep, rumbling sound that shook the windows. "This is ridiculous. Human military training? They still use chemical explosives and metal bullets. Their idea of advanced tactics is probably hiding behind rocks and throwing primitive grenades." "I did some research on human military history," Zilm said, his voice filled with scientific curiosity. "Their conflicts are indeed primitive. They fight with crude weapons on the surface of their single planet. No space combat, no energy weapons, no advanced technology. Their largest wars involved millions of them, shooting simple projectiles at each other." Vex shook his head in disbelief. "And this young human thinks he can train alongside cadets from species that have been fighting galactic wars for thousands of years. The arrogance is almost admirable. What should we do with the application? Zilm asked. Obviously, we cannot seriously consider accepting a human into the academy. Vex thought for a moment. A slow smile spread across his face. Actually, Professor, I think we should accept him. Zilm's large eyes grew even wider. Accept him? Are you serious? Think about it, Vex said, his voice filled with mischief. It would be entertaining to watch this primitive human try to keep up with real warriors. The other cadets would enjoy having someone to look down on. And when he inevitably fails and drops out, it will serve as a good lesson about the difference between real military training and whatever passes for combat. Preparation on his backward planet, Zilm began to understand. A practical joke on a galactic scale. The other instructors would find it amusing. Exactly, Vex said. We accept one human alongside the 500 elite cadets from across the galaxy. Let him struggle with training designed for the galaxy's most advanced warriors. It will be educational for everyone involved. The other cadets will not be happy about having to train alongside a primitive human, Zilm warned. That is part of the joke, Vex replied. Let them feel insulted. It will motivate them to train harder. And when the human fails, it will remind them why some species are meant to be warriors and others are meant to be farmers and merchants. Zilm nodded slowly. Very well. I will process the acceptance. But what about the Academy Board? They will need to approve this. Leave that to me, Vex said. I will present it as a cultural exchange program, a way to study primitive military techniques. The board loves that sort of academic nonsense. 3 days later, Jake Morrison received an official acceptance message from the Galactic Military Academy. He was sitting in his small room at the Earth Military Preparation Center when the message arrived on his communication device. The device was a simple human invention that looked like a primitive toy compared to galactic technology. Jake could not believe what he was reading. He had dreamed of attending the academy since he was a child, but he never thought it was possible. Humans were not even considered for galactic military service. They were seen as a peaceful species that had no business in the larger conflicts of the galaxy. But Jake was different from most humans. He had been studying military tactics since he was 8 years old. He read everything he could find about combat, strategy, and warfare. He trained his body every day, pushing himself harder than any of his classmates. While other teenagers played games and watched entertainment, Jake practiced fighting techniques and studied the history of great battles. The acceptance message included instructions for travel to Nexus Prime. Jake would need to board a human transport ship that would take him to the academy. The trip would take 2 weeks in human-built, faster-than-light travel. Jake's parents were worried about their son traveling so far from Earth. His father, a retired military officer, understood Jake's dream but feared for his safety. His mother cried when she realized her son would be gone for at least a year. Are you sure about this, Jake? His father asked. The academy is designed for alien species. They are stronger, faster, and more advanced than humans. You will be completely out of your league. Jake looked at his father with determination in his eyes. I have been preparing for this my whole life, Dad. I know I am not as strong as a Crethan or as fast as a Zephyrian, but I have something they do not have. What is that? His mother asked. I am human, Jake said simply. Humans have survived on Earth by being smart, adaptable, and stubborn. We did not become the dominant species on our planet by being the strongest. We did it by being the most determined. 2 weeks later, Jake Morrison boarded the human transport ship Endeavor. The ship was cramped and uncomfortable compared to the luxury vessels used by other species. Jake's quarters were tiny, barely large enough for a bed and a small desk. But he did not mind. He spent the journey studying everything he could about the alien species. He would be training alongside Dot when the Endeavor finally arrived at Nexus Prime. Jake pressed his face to the small window and stared in wonder at the Galactic Military Academy. It was larger and more impressive than anything he had imagined. The massive complex stretched across the horizon, its towers reaching toward the stars. Jake gathered his simple human equipment and prepared to leave the ship. His gear looked primitive compared to the advanced technology he had seen in the academies. Promotional materials, but it was all he had. He would make it work. As Jake stepped off the transport and onto the surface of Nexus Prime, he had no idea that his acceptance had been a joke. He did not know that the instructors expected him to fail quickly and return to Earth in shame. He only knew that he had been given the chance he had dreamed of his entire life. The greatest challenge of his life was about to begin. Jake Morrison's first day at the Galactic Military Academy was harder than anything he had experienced in his life. He woke up at dawn in his small dormitory room, surrounded by cadets who were twice his size and belonged to species he had only read about in books. The dormitory building was designed for different alien body types. The beds were too big for Jake's human frame, and the walls were covered with environmental controls he did not understand. His roommate was a young Crethin named Krell Stoneheart, who looked at Jake with a mixture of curiosity and confusion. "You are the human?" Krell said in his deep, gravelly voice. "I heard rumors that one of your species had been accepted, but I did not believe it. Why would the Academy accept such a primitive being?" Jake tried to stay polite. "I am here to learn and prove myself, just like everyone else." Krell made a sound that might have been laughter. "We will see how long you last." The morning began with physical training. Jake joined 500 other cadets in the main exercise area, a vast space filled with obstacle courses, weightlifting equipment, and combat training rings. The other cadets stared at him openly, some with amusement, others with obvious contempt. The physical training instructor was a massive Crethin named Sergeant Rock. He stood 10 feet tall and had scars covering his armored skin. His voice could be heard across the entire training ground. "Today we begin with basic conditioning," Rock announced. "You will run 5 miles, complete the obstacle course, and then participate in strength training. Anyone who cannot keep up will be removed from the program." Jake had always been in good shape by human standards, but he quickly realized that human fitness was nothing compared to alien capabilities. The Crethins ran without getting tired, their heavy bodies moving with surprising grace. The Zephyrians moved so fast they seemed to teleport from one obstacle to another. The Valdari used their mental powers to help their bodies perform impossible feats. Jake finished the 5-mile run in last place, gasping for breath while the other cadets barely seemed winded. During the obstacle course, he struggled to climb walls that the other cadets jumped over easily. When they moved to strength training, Jake could barely lift weights that the youngest Crethin cadets handled without effort. "Look at the little human," said a voice behind him. Jake turned to see Zork's Battleclaw, one of the older Crethin cadets. Zork's was even bigger than Krell, with darker armor and cruel yellow eyes. "He can barely keep up with our warm-up exercises." A small group of cadets had gathered around to watch Jake struggle. Among them was Nix Mindrinder, a Valdari with pale purple skin and large black eyes. She was smaller than the Crethins, but radiated an aura of mental power that made Jake uncomfortable. Perhaps the human should return to his primitive planet, Nix said, her voice seeming to speak directly into Jake's mind. "This place is for real warriors, not for creatures who still fight with metal sticks." Jake felt his face turn red with embarrassment and anger, but he did not respond. He had learned early in life that actions spoke louder than words. He would prove himself through his performance, not through arguments. The academic classes were almost as challenging as the physical training. Jake sat in lecture halls designed for alien body types, struggling to understand concepts that came naturally to species with superior mental abilities. The history of galactic warfare involved conflicts on dozens of worlds, with weapons and tactics that humans had never imagined. Professor Zilm taught advanced military strategy, a class that covered everything from space combat to planetary invasion tactics. The cerebroid instructor seemed to enjoy asking Jake questions that highlighted his ignorance. "Cadet Morrison," Zilm said during one class, "can you explain the proper formation for a three-dimensional assault on a fortified asteroid base?" Jake had never even seen a real asteroid, let alone studied how to attack one. "I am not familiar with that tactic, Professor." "Of course you are not," Zilm replied with obvious satisfaction. "Your species has never engaged in real military action beyond fighting each other on your single planet. How can you hope to understand true warfare?" The other cadets laughed, and Jake felt his face burn with shame. But instead of giving up, he made a decision that would change everything. That night, while his classmates slept, Jake went to the Academy's library and began to study. The library was enormous, filled with military records and tactical manuals from across the galaxy. Jake found books about every species, every type of weapon, every form of combat that had ever been used in galactic warfare. He read about the strengths and weaknesses of different alien races, their fighting styles, and their psychological profiles. Jake discovered that the Crethans were incredibly strong and tough, but they relied too heavily on brute force. They had trouble adapting when their initial attacks failed. The Valdari were powerful psychics, but their mental abilities required concentration and could be disrupted by stress or unexpected situations. The Zephyrians were amazingly fast, but their speed made them predictable in confined spaces. Every species had advantages, but they also had weaknesses. Jake began to understand that the key to success was not trying to match his opponent's strengths, but finding ways to exploit their weaknesses. During combat training, Jake started to apply what he had learned. When sparring with Crethan cadets, he avoided direct confrontation and used mobility to tire them out. When facing Valdari opponents, he used unpredictable movements and emotional responses to disrupt their mental concentration. Against Zephyrian fighters, he chose battlegrounds where their speed was less useful. At first, these tactics did not work well. Jake still lost most of his fights, often badly. But he was learning something that the other cadets were not. While they relied on their natural abilities, Jake was developing the skills of adaptation and tactical thinking. Commander Vex watched Jake's progress with growing interest. The human was supposed to be failing by now, dropping out in shame and returning to his primitive planet. Instead, he was slowly but steadily improving. His performance was still far below the other cadets, but he was showing signs of real development. "The human is more resilient than I expected," Vex told Professor Zilm during one of their weekly meetings. "He should have given up by now." "His academic performance is still poor," Zilm replied. "He cannot match the intellectual capabilities of the other species. Perhaps he is simply too stupid to realize he should quit." But Vex was not convinced. He had been watching Jake carefully, and he saw something that disturbed him. The human was not just enduring the training, he was learning from it. Every defeat taught him something new. Every failure made him stronger. Jake's daily routine became a cycle of training, studying, and more training. He woke up before dawn to practice combat techniques he had read about the night before. He stayed late in the library, reading about military history and alien psychology. He pushed his body to its limits every day, slowly building strength and endurance. The other cadets began to notice Jake's improvement. He was still far from being their equal, but he was no longer the helpless primitive they had expected. In hand-to-hand combat, he lasted longer before being defeated. In tactical exercises, he occasionally came up with creative solutions that surprised his instructors. Krell Stoneheart was the first to show Jake any real respect. After a particularly brutal sparring session, where Jake had managed to stay on his feet for a full minute against a superior opponent, Krell approached him in the dormitory. "You are tougher than I expected, human," Krell said. "Most beings would have given up by now." Jake was cleaning cuts and bruises from the day's training. "Giving up is not an option for me. I came here to prove that humans can be warriors too." "Why is it so important to you?" Krell asked. "Your species is known for being peaceful. You could return to your planet and live a comfortable life. Why endure this punishment?" Jake thought about the question for a long minute. Because someone has to show the galaxy that humans are more than just primitive farmers. We have the potential to be something greater. If I give up now, no other human will ever get this chance. Krell nodded slowly. "I understand. Honor is important to my people as well. Perhaps I was wrong to dismiss you so quickly." That conversation marked a turning point in Jake's experience at the academy. While most cadets still treated him with contempt, a few began to see him as something more than a joke. He was still the weakest cadet in the class, but he was no longer seen as completely hopeless. Jake's breakthrough came during a tactical simulation exercise. The cadets were divided into teams and given a complex military scenario to solve. Jake's team was assigned to capture a heavily defended enemy position using limited resources. The other team members, led by Zork's Battleclaw, immediately began planning a direct assault. They would use their superior strength and firepower to overwhelm the defenders. It was a typical approach for their species, relying on natural advantages to achieve victory. But Jake had been studying the enemy position carefully. He noticed something that the others had missed. The defenses were designed to repel a frontal attack, but they had a weak point that could be exploited through unconventional tactics. What if we do not attack the main defenses at all? Jake suggested. What if we create a diversion here, while a small team infiltrates through this weak point? Zorks laughed. 3 months into his training at the Galactic Military Academy, Jake Morrison faced his greatest challenge yet. The instructors had announced the midterm evaluation, known throughout the galaxy as the Crucible. It was a week-long survival and combat exercise that would test everything the cadets had learned. The Crucible would take place on Karo 7, a death world that had been specifically chosen for its hostile environment. The planet's surface was covered in dense jungle, acid. Rain fell constantly, and the wildlife had evolved to hunt the galaxy's most dangerous predators. Many cadets had died on Karos the 7th over the Academy's 3-century history. "The Crucible is not just a test," Commander Vex explained to the assembled cadets. "It is a trial by fire that will separate the true warriors from those who only think they are warriors. You will be divided into mixed species teams and dropped into different locations on Karo 7. Your objective is simple: survive for 7 days while completing various military missions." Jake stood among the 500 cadets, feeling smaller than ever. Around him, Crethans checked their advanced armor systems. Valdari practiced their mental disciplines, and Zephyrians tested their speed enhancement equipment. Jake's gear looked primitive in comparison. Basic human military equipment that would have been considered obsolete by galactic standards. "Team assignments have been randomized," Vex continued. "You will work with beings from different species, different backgrounds, and different fighting styles. Learn to cooperate, or you will not survive." Jake looked at his assignment tablet. He had been placed on Team Delta with 2 other cadets. His heart sank when he saw their names. Zara Swiftwind was a Zephyrian who had made her contempt for humans very clear. She was known for her arrogance and her belief that only speed mattered in combat. The other team member was Krell Stoneheart, his Crethan roommate who had recently begun to show Jake some respect. The 3 team members met in the equipment bay to prepare for deployment. Zara barely looked at Jake as she checked her sleek, form-fitting armor. Her people moved so fast that they needed special equipment to protect them from the friction of high-speed movement. "I cannot believe I have been assigned to work with a primitive human," Zara said, her voice filled with disgust. "This is supposed to be a serious military exercise, not a babysitting assignment." Krell was more diplomatic. "Jake has shown improvement. In recent weeks, he may be useful in ways we do not expect." "Useful?" Zara laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a storm. "What can a slow, weak human possibly contribute to a team of real warriors?" Jake ignored the insult and focused on checking his equipment. He had spent weeks studying everything he could find about Karos 7. The planet's environment would be hostile to all three species, but in different ways. The acid rain would eat through Krell's armor over time. The dense jungle would limit Zara's speed advantage. For Jake, the challenge would be surviving long enough to put his knowledge to use. The transport ship dropped the teams at dawn on Karos 7. Jake's first breath of the planet's atmosphere burned his lungs. The air was thick with moisture and chemical vapors that made his eyes water. The jungle around them was alive with sounds of creatures that no human had ever imagined. "Stay close," Krell warned as they moved away from the landing site. "The wildlife here is extremely dangerous. Even a Krethen can be killed if caught off guard." Their first mission was to locate and secure a supply cache hidden somewhere in their assigned sector. The cache contained food, water, and medical supplies that they would need for the rest of the week. Without it, they would have to survive on what they carried, which was not enough for 7 days. Zara immediately took charge, her natural arrogance making her assume leadership. "I will scout ahead using my speed. You two follow behind and try to keep up." She disappeared into the jungle in a blur of motion. Jake and Krell followed more slowly, with Jake using his knowledge of the terrain to choose the safest path. He had studied the planet's ecosystem and knew which plants were poisonous, which areas were likely to contain predators, and where the acid rain would be most concentrated. 20 minutes later, they heard Zara scream. Jake and Krell rushed toward the sound, pushing through thick vegetation that cut at their exposed skin. They found Zara trapped in a tangle of vines that had reacted to her high-speed movement by contracting around her body. "The vines are poisonous," Jake said, recognizing the species from his studies. "They are also sensitive to vibration. The faster you move, the tighter they grip." Zara struggled against the vines, but her movements only made them tighten. "Get me out of here," she gasped. Jake carefully approached the trapped Zephyrian. "Stop moving. These vines respond to kinetic energy. The more you struggle, the worse it gets." Using his combat knife, Jake began carefully cutting through the vines. He worked slowly and precisely, avoiding the poisonous thorns that covered the plant's surface. It took 20 minutes to free Zara, precious time that could have been spent searching for the supply cache. "How did you know about those vines?" Zara asked, her voice shaken. "I studied the planet's ecosystem," Jake replied. "I knew we would face challenges that could not be solved by strength or speed alone." Krell nodded approvingly. "Perhaps the humans' knowledge will be useful after all." They continued their search for the supply cache, but the jungle seemed determined to kill them. Acid rain began to fall, forcing them to take shelter under rock formations. The chemical precipitation started eating through Krell's armor, just as Jake had predicted. "My armor will not last much longer," Krell admitted. "The acid is stronger than our equipment was designed to handle." Jake had prepared for this problem. He had brought extra protective coating designed for human equipment, which was built to handle harsher conditions, because humans came from a more hostile planet than most galactic species realized. "Use this," Jake said, offering Krell the protective coating. "It should help your armor last longer." As night fell, they made camp in a cave that Jake had identified as safe. His knowledge of the planet's geology had helped him recognize signs of stable rock formations that would not collapse. "I do not understand," Zara said as they prepared to sleep. "How does a primitive human know more about surviving on this planet than we do?" Jake was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. Humans evolved on a death world too. Earth might not be as hostile as Karos the Seventh, but it taught us how to survive in environments that want to kill us. We learned to use our brains instead of relying on natural advantages. The second day brought their first encounter with the planet's most dangerous predators. They were searching for their second objective when they heard the haunting call of Karosian deathstalkers. These creatures were the size of Earth elephants, with multiple rows of teeth and the ability to move silently through the jungle. Deathstalkers. Krell whispered, "A pack of them, by the sound. We need to move carefully." Zara wanted to use her speed to outrun the predators, but Jake stopped her. "They hunt by sound and movement. Running will only draw their attention. We need to be smarter than that." Jake had studied the Deathstalkers' hunting patterns. They relied on echolocation in the dense jungle, using sound waves to locate their prey, but they had a weakness that few beings knew about. They could be confused by certain frequencies. "I have an idea," Jake said, "but you will have to trust me." He led his team to a narrow canyon where the rock walls would amplify sound. Using his knowledge of the Deathstalker's biology, Jake created a series of echoes that confused the creature's echolocation. The predators became disoriented, unable to locate their prey in the maze of conflicting sound waves. "Now we move," Jake whispered, slowly and quietly. They escaped the Deathstalkers without a fight, something that impressed both of his teammates. Zara began to look at Jake with new respect. "That was brilliant," she admitted. "I would never have thought to use sound against them." The third day brought their greatest challenge yet. They encountered another team that had been driven to desperation by the planet's hostile environment. The other team, led by Zork's Battleclaw, had lost most of their supplies and were trying to take Team Delta's resources by force. "Give us your supplies," Zorks demanded, his massive frame blocking their path. "We need them more than you do." Jake's team was outnumbered and outgunned. Zorks' team included 2 other Crethans and a Valdari psychic. In a direct fight, Team Delta would be destroyed. But Jake had been studying his classmates as carefully as he had studied the planet's ecosystem. He knew their weaknesses and their patterns of behavior. Zorks was proud and aggressive, always preferring direct confrontation. The other Crethans would follow his lead without question. The Valdari was powerful but overconfident in our mental abilities. "We do not have to fight," Jake said calmly. "There is another way." He proposed a challenge, a single combat between team leaders, with the winning team taking the supplies. It was an appeal to Zorks' pride and honor, something that Jake knew. The Crethan could not resist. Zorx laughed. "You want to fight me? A primitive human against a Crethan warrior? This will be over in seconds." The fight lasted 20 minutes. Jake could not match Zorks' strength, but he had learned to use the environment to his advantage. He used the jungle terrain to limit Zorks' movement, exploited the Crethan's predictable attack patterns, and gradually, after the Crucible, everything changed for Jake Morrison at the Galactic Military Academy. Word of his performance had spread throughout the academy like wildfire. The human who had been admitted as a joke was now being discussed in instructor meetings and studied by tactical analysis teams. Jake returned from Karos, 7 to find his status among the cadets completely transformed. Where once he had been ignored or mocked, now he was approached with curiosity and respect. Even cadets who had never spoken to him before wanted to know how he had achieved such success. Morrison called out Zen Logic Mind, the cerebroid who had been in Jake's tactical simulation team. I have been analyzing your performance data from the Crucible. Your strategic thinking patterns are unlike anything in our databases. Jake was walking to his advanced combat tactics class, carrying the same simple equipment he had brought from Earth. Despite his growing reputation, he had not been given access to the advanced alien technology that other cadets used. I just try to think about problems differently, Jake replied. Most military tactics assume you have certain advantages. I learned to fight assuming I had none. Zen's large brain processed this information. Fascinating. You have developed a completely new approach to warfare based on assumed disadvantage. This could revolutionize military thinking. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Professor Drack, the Academy's chief combat instructor. Drack was a veteran warrior from the Krethen homeworld, with battle scars covering his massive frame. He had fought in more galactic conflicts than any other instructor. Cadet Morrison, Drack said in his deep voice, I have reviewed your Crucible performance. Your tactical innovations are being studied by the Academy's research division. Several of your techniques are being incorporated into our advanced training programs. Jake felt a mixture of pride and disbelief. Thank you, Professor. I was just doing my best to help my team succeed. Your best appears to be exceptional. Drack replied, I would like you to participate in our advanced combat simulation program. It is normally reserved for final year cadets, but your performance suggests you are ready for greater challenges. The Advanced Combat Simulation Program was legendary at the Academy. It used the most sophisticated virtual reality technology in the galaxy to create realistic battle scenarios. Cadets fought against artificial intelligences, programmed with the tactical knowledge of the greatest military minds in galactic history. Jake's first advanced simulation was against a recreation of the Battle of Rigel Prime, one of the most famous military engagements in galactic history. He was given command of a small force and told to defeat an enemy that had superior numbers and technology. Most cadets approached such simulations by trying to match the enemy's strength with superior tactics or technology. Jake took a completely different approach. He studied the enemy's psychology, their cultural weaknesses, and their historical patterns of behavior. The simulation lasted 6 hours. Jake's forces were outnumbered 3-1, but he used unconventional tactics that confused and demoralized the enemy. Instead of fighting a traditional battle, he created situations where the enemy's advantages became disadvantages. When the simulation ended, Jake had achieved a complete victory with minimal casualties. The instructors who had been watching were amazed. No cadet had ever won that particular scenario so decisively. How did you do it? Professor Drack asked after reviewing the results. Your tactics were unlike anything we have seen before. Jake thought carefully before answering. I realized that the enemy was programmed based on how galactic species normally fight. But humans learned warfare differently. We had to develop tactics for fighting opponents who were bigger, stronger, and better armed than us. Word of Jake's simulation victories spread throughout the Academy. He began to attract attention from cadets and instructors who wanted to understand his methods. His dormitory room became an informal meeting place where beings from different species came to discuss military strategy. Krell Stoneheart, his Krethen roommate, became one of Jake's closest allies. You have changed the way I think about combat, Krell admitted one evening. I used to believe that strength and honor were enough to win any battle. Now I understand that intelligence and adaptability are just as important. Even Zara Swiftwind, who had once mocked Jake's primitive origins, began seeking his advice. Your tactical thinking saved our team on Karo 7, she said. I want to learn how to fight the way you do. Jake was happy to share his knowledge. He organized study groups where he taught other cadets about human military history and the lessons it contained. He explained how humans had learned to fight larger predators, how they had developed weapons and tactics to overcome natural disadvantages, and how they had survived on a planet that was trying to kill them. The Academy's combat rankings were updated weekly, and Jake's name began climbing steadily upward. In his 4th month, he broke into the top 100. By his 5th month, he was in the top 50. Each week brought new victories in combat simulations and tactical exercises. Commander Vex watched Jake's progress with growing unease. The humans. Performance was not just unexpected, it was impossible, according to everything Vex thought he knew about galactic warfare. Jake was defeating opponents who should have been able to crush him without effort. This is becoming a problem, Vex told Professor Zilm during one of their private meetings. The human was supposed to fail and return to his planet in shame. Instead, he is becoming one of our top cadets. Zilm studied the performance data on his tablet. His tactical innovations are extraordinary. Several galactic military organizations have requested copies of his simulation records. They want to study his methods. That is exactly what I am afraid of, Vex replied. We intended to demonstrate human inferiority. Instead, we may have created a military genius who will make the entire galaxy reconsider their opinion of his species. Jake was unaware of these concerns. He was focused entirely on his training and his goal of proving that humans could compete with the galaxy's elite warriors. Every day brought new challenges and new opportunities to learn. His breakthrough came during a multi-species combat exercise. 50 cadets were divided into 2 armies and given a complex military objective. Jake was assigned to the smaller force, which was expected to lose quickly against superior numbers. Jake was not given command of his army, but his tactical suggestions were so effective that the other cadets began following his lead naturally. He analyzed the enemy's composition and realized that their strength came from the diversity of their species. But diversity could also be a weakness if the different species could not coordinate effectively. Jake's army used hit-and-run tactics to separate the enemy into smaller groups. Then they exploited the communication problems between different species to create confusion and chaos. Within hours, the larger army had collapsed into disorganized fragments that could be defeated individually. Brilliant, said General Vrak, a visiting military officer who had been observing the exercise. I have never seen such effective use of psychological warfare. This human understands something about multi-species combat that we have overlooked. The exercise results were reviewed by the Academy's senior staff. Jake's tactical innovations were so impressive that they were immediately incorporated into the Academy's curriculum. Other cadets began studying his methods and trying to copy his success. By the end of his 5th month, Jake had reached the top 10 in the Academy's combat rankings. He was competing with cadets who had been training for years, beings from species that had been bred for warfare over thousands of generations. His success attracted attention from beyond the Academy. Military leaders from across the galaxy requested meetings with a human cadet who was revolutionizing tactical thinking. Defense contractors wanted to study his methods and incorporate them into their training programs. Jake remained humble despite his growing fame. I am just doing what humans have always done, he told a visiting journalist. We adapt, we learn, and we never give up. Those qualities served us well on Earth, and they are serving me well here. But privately, Jake was beginning to understand the larger implications of his success. He was not just proving himself as an individual, he was proving the potential of his entire species. Every victory he achieved opened new possibilities for human participation in galactic affairs. The Academy's final examinations were approaching, and Jake found himself in a position he had never imagined possible. He was ranked 5th in his class, competing for the title of top combat graduate. The other top contenders were the elite of the elite, beings who had been groomed for military leadership since birth. "You realize what this means," Krell said one evening as they studied together. "If you win the final examinations, you will become the first human to graduate at the top of a galactic military academy. The political implications would be enormous." Jake nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. "I know, but I cannot think about politics right now. I have to focus on the examinations and do my best." The final examinations would consist of individual combat scenarios, each designed to test different aspects of military skill. Jake would face opponents, chosen specifically to challenge his weaknesses and exploit any flaws in his techniques. As Jake prepared foe. The final week at the Galactic Military Academy had arrived, and Jake Morrison stood at the threshold of making history. The Academy's graduation examinations were legendary throughout the galaxy, designed to test every skill a military officer would need in real combat situations. The examination was called the Gauntlet, and it consisted of 7 individual combat scenarios against the Academy's most skilled opponents. Each fight would test different aspects of military knowledge, strategy, tactics, adaptability, leadership, and pure combat skill. The cadets would face opponents chosen specifically to challenge their weaknesses. Jake stood in the preparation chamber with the other top 10 cadets in his class. Around him were the elite of the elite, Zork's Battleclaw, whose strength had made him famous throughout the Academy. Nyx Mindrender, whose psychic abilities had never been defeated. Zara Swiftwind, whose speed was legendary even among her own species, and 6 others who represented the best warriors their species could produce. "Today we find out who the real warriors are," Zork said, his voice filled with confidence. Despite his defeat by Jake during the Crucible, he had continued to improve and was still considered one of the most dangerous fighters in the Academy. Jake checked his equipment one final time. He still carried the same basic human gear he had brought from Earth 6 months ago. While the other cadets had access to advanced alien technology, Jake had learned to make his simple equipment work in ways that surprised everyone. The first combat scenario was announced. Jake would face Zork's Battleclaw in a one-on-one fight in a standard combat arena. The match would last until one fighter was unable to continue or surrendered. The arena was packed with cadets and instructors who had come to watch the impossible, a human fighting a Crethan warrior in single combat. Most expected the fight to be over quickly, with Jake's larger opponent overwhelming him through superior strength and armor. Commander Vex watched from the instructor's observation deck, his feelings mixed between hope and dread. Part of him still wanted Jake to fail, to prove that the human success had been a fluke. But another part of him had begun to respect the young human's determination and skill. The fight began with Zorks charging forward, his massive frame moving with surprising speed. His 4 arms carried weapons designed to take advantage of Crethan's strength and reach. Against any normal opponent, the battle would have been over in seconds. But Jake was no longer the confused, overwhelmed human who had arrived at the Academy 6 months earlier. He had studied Zorks' fighting style for months, learning every pattern, every preference, every weakness. As Zorks attacked, Jake was already moving, using the arena's environment to his advantage. The fight lasted 23 minutes. Jake could not match Zorks' strength, but he had learned something that his opponent never understood: how to turn strength into a weakness. He used Zorks' own momentum against him, led him into positions where his size became a disadvantage, and gradually wore down the larger fighter through superior endurance and tactical thinking. When Zorks finally collapsed from exhaustion, the arena fell silent. No one could believe what they had just witnessed. A human had defeated one of the Academy's most powerful warriors through pure skill and intelligence. "How?" Zorks gasped as Jake helped him to his feet. "I am stronger, better armed, more experienced. How did you defeat me?" Jake smiled with quiet respect for his fallen opponent. "You fought like a Crethan. I fought like a human. Sometimes that makes all the difference." The second scenario pitted Jake against Nix Mingrender in a test of mental combat. The Valdari psychic was known for her ability to read opponents' minds and predict their actions before they made them. She had never been defeated in mental combat, but Jake had prepared for this challenge too. He had studied human meditation techniques and mental disciplines that were unknown to galactic science. While Nix tried to read his mind, Jake used emotional chaos and instinctive responses that could not be predicted or calculated. The mental battle lasted an hour, with Jake using techniques borrowed from human martial arts and meditation practices. When Nix finally admitted defeat, she stared at Jake with new understanding. "Your mind works differently than any other species," she said. "You think with emotion and instinct as much as logic. It makes you impossible to predict." The third scenario was a speed and agility test against a Zephyrian fighter. The fourth was a tactical command simulation where Jake had to lead a mixed species. Force against superior numbers. The fifth was a survival scenario in a hostile environment. Each test was designed to challenge Jake in areas where humans were supposed to be inferior. Jake passed every test, not through superior physical abilities, but through the application of uniquely human approaches to each challenge. He used psychology against the speed fighter, creating a confined space where speed became a liability. He led the diverse force by understanding each species' motivations and fears. He survived the hostile environment by using knowledge and adaptability rather than natural resistance. By the sixth scenario, word had spread throughout the Academy and beyond. Military leaders from across the galaxy were watching the examinations, trying to understand how a primitive human was defeating the galaxy's elite warriors. The sixth opponent was Professor Drac himself, the Academy's chief combat instructor. Drac was a veteran of dozens of galactic conflicts, with centuries of experience and access to the most advanced military technology available. "I have watched your progress for months," Drac said as they prepared to fight. "You have shown me things about warfare that I never imagined. Now I want to test your skills against a true master." The battle between Jake and Professor Drac became legendary in Academy history. It lasted an hour and 15 minutes, with Jake demonstrating every skill he had learned during his time at the Academy. He used environmental tactics, psychological warfare, and pure human stubbornness to match an opponent who should have been able to defeat him easily. When Professor Drac finally acknowledged defeat, the watching crowd erupted in amazement. Jake had just defeated one of the galaxy's most skilled warriors, using nothing but human tactics and determination. "You fight like no one I have ever encountered," Drac said with deep respect. "You have shown me that there are aspects of warfare that we have never explored. Your species has much to teach the galaxy." The seventh and final scenario was the ultimate test. Jake would face Commander Vex himself in full combat gear. Vex was not just an instructor. He was a legendary warrior who had helped establish the Academy's reputation for excellence. As they faced each other in the arena, Vex spoke quietly so only Jake could hear. "You were supposed to be a joke, a primitive human who would fail quickly and remind everyone why some species are warriors and others are farmers. Instead, you have become something none of us expected." Jake nodded respectfully. "I know why you admitted me, Commander, but I am grateful for the chance to prove what humans can achieve." The final battle was the longest and most intense of all. Vex used every advantage available to him: superior technology, centuries of experience, and the natural physical advantages of his species. But Jake had learned something during his time at the Academy that even Vex had not understood. Humans had learned to fight by being the weakest species on their planet. Every victory they achieved had come through intelligence, adaptability, and an almost supernatural refusal to give up. These qualities had allowed them to dominate Earth, and they were now allowing Jake to compete with the galaxy's elite. The battle lasted nearly 2 hours, with both fighters pushed to their absolute limits. In the end, Jake achieved victory not through superior strength or technology, but through the quintessentially human ability to find a way to win when winning should have been impossible. When Commander Vex finally acknowledged defeat, the Academy fell silent. The impossible had happened. A human had just achieved the highest combat scores in the Academy's 300-year history. At the graduation ceremony, Jake Morrison stood at the top of his class. His final scores were not just the highest in his year, they were the highest ever recorded at the Galactic Military Academy. The primitive human who had been admitted as a joke had become the standard by which all future cadets would be measured. As Jake received his commission as a lieutenant in the Galactic Defense Corps, representatives from military organizations across the galaxy approached him with offers and opportunities. The galaxy had suddenly realized that humanity might have more to offer than anyone had imagined. Commander Vex approached Jake after the ceremony, his expression a mixture of respect and amazement. "Morrison, I have to ask, how did you do it? How did a primitive human surpass warriors from species that have been fighting galactic wars for thousands of years?" Jake thought carefully before answering. "You made one mistake, Commander. You assumed that being physically superior made you better warriors. But humans learned to fight by being the weakest species on our planet. We did not survive by being strong. We survived by being smart, adaptable, and too stubborn to quit." He looked up at the stars that would soon become his battlefield. "You taught me to fight like a warrior, but I learned to fight like a human. And in the end, that made all the difference." As Jake prepared to leave the Academy and begin his career in the Galactic Defense Corps,